Hey, I'm Jane Langford, though I'm not sure I'll keep that name much longer. My life turned upside down recently. I spent my youth caring for my family, giving up my dreams, only to find out that my younger sister inherited everything, and I was left with nothing. Langford, a name I wore for almost 30 years like a shield and a badge, now feels heavy, loaded with questions I never expected to ask. I've been thinking a lot about what it even meant to be a Langford. Was it the love of a family? The weight of expectations? Or just a name stitched onto me, a label I clung to because it gave me somewhere to belong? Growing up, I thought I had everything. My childhood was happy, bright with sun in the garden, laughter spilling over dinner tables, and stories from Grandma Beatrice that always smelled of roses and old paper. But there was a subtle, almost invisible pattern I noticed early on. A pattern that made me feel slightly off-center in the warmth I was supposed to share. My parents, they always seemed to praise Chloe a little more. Just a fraction more attention, a fraction more enthusiasm when she did something right. I told myself it was normal. Chloe was younger, only 4 years younger, and I reasoned that parents are usually more tender with their youngest children. It was easy to believe. Chloe had this soft way about her, the kind of gentle sweetness that made everyone instinctively protective. And me? I was different. I had the bright hair that everyone always mentioned, blonde, shining almost unnaturally against our family's dark-haired lineage. I was told it came from my Swedish great-grandmother, an exotic family story that made me feel special, unique, and somehow a little distant from everyone else. It gave me a kind of quiet pride, even if I didn't fully understand it at the time. I remember trying, always trying, to be more, to be better, to deserve the same attention, the same approval. I studied harder, I smiled when I wasn't in the mood, I held myself straight and careful, hoping that my parents would see me, really see me, and love me as much as they loved Chloe. Every achievement felt like a small victory, but also like a test. Every compliment Chloe received was a reminder that love in our house came in different measures, measured in smiles and sighs and quiet glances. Even then, I didn't resent her. I loved her fiercely, as sisters do. But I carried this quiet urgency to prove myself, to hold my place in the family that felt slightly tilted towards someone else. Maybe that's why I clung to the stories about my hair and the Swedish great-grandmother. Maybe that's why I worked so hard to be the perfect Jane Langford, reliable, responsible, dependable. I wanted their love to be unwavering, to be measured not in comparison but as something absolute, unshakable. Looking back now, I can see it all more clearly. The patterns, the little invisible cracks. I can see how I carried them with me, how I molded myself around their expectations while Chloe floated effortlessly through life, adored for simply being. And I see how all of that prepared me, unknowingly, for the storm that would come and reshape everything I thought I knew about family, about love, and about myself. Everything changed the day of the accident. I was 18, full of hope and determination, on the verge of starting my studies to become a doctor, a dream I had nurtured for years. Chloe was only 14, still in the middle of her school years, a bright and carefree teenager who trusted the world to guide her. And then the phone rang. Grandma Beatrice's voice on the line was frail, trembling with grief. My parents. They were gone. A car accident. Sudden. Irreversible. My chest tightened, my stomach dropped, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. 14-year-old Chloe had lost both her parents, and suddenly the woman who had always seemed strong, who had guided me through my own childhood, was broken. Beatrice, 80 years old and already fragile, needed help to manage the household and care for Chloe. She asked me to stay, to raise Chloe, to hold the family together. And she needed me now, not years later, not in theory. She needed me immediately. I remember standing in her living room, staring at her quivering hands, and realizing the weight of what she was asking. I was 18. I had plans. I had a life I had imagined for myself. But Chloe was helpless without me, and Beatrice couldn't do it alone. I agreed. I didn't hesitate, though the thought of shelving my medical studies for an uncertain future made my chest ache. To support us, I took a job as a hospital orderly. Long, exhausting shifts, physically demanding and far from the studies I had dreamed of, became my new reality. Every day I cleaned, transported patients, delivered medicines, and worked to make enough money to keep us afloat. Every night I returned to the house, weary and aching, to help Chloe with homework, make dinner, and soothe a grieving grandmother. There were moments when it felt unfair. Chloe, younger, protected, still a child, could lean on others. I was 18, carrying the sudden weight of an entire family. But when I saw her face, sleeping quietly after a difficult day, unaware of the turmoil around her, the sting of envy melted away. She had lost enough already. My dreams could wait. Her safety, her well-being, her life, that couldn't. So I stayed. I worked. I gave up the life I had imagined, the studies I had prepared for, the freedom I had longed to claim. And in doing so, I became the steady hand, the one everyone relied on, the one who held a fragile household together while my own future quietly slipped out of reach. Looking back now, I see how those years forged me, shaped the path I would walk, and set the stage for everything I would sacrifice, and everything I would eventually lose. Years passed, quietly, almost imperceptibly, until the rhythm of our lives became a series of routines I barely noticed. Chloe grew up before my eyes, taller, confident, lighter in spirit, carrying her laughter and charm wherever she went. I watched her transform from a tentative teenager into a young woman with dreams and ambition of her own, and I was proud. Deep down, I always was. But alongside that pride, a small, stubborn ember of envy burned quietly, often when I wasn't looking. At 26, I had spent the better part of 8 years caring for Chloe and our grandmother Beatrice. The house had become a sort of second hospital, echoing with my footsteps, filled with the soft sounds of medications being sorted, meals being prepared, and the occasional sigh of frustration from someone tired of life's endless demands. Beatrice had grown frail, her sharp eyes now dimmed with age, her body bent by the passing years. She had turned 88, and though her mind remained as alert as ever, her energy was gone. Chloe, on the other hand, was leaving. University called her, promising experiences and freedom that I had once imagined for myself at her age. I helped pack her things, carried her boxes up the stairs, and hugged her tightly as she left. I reminded myself it was right. She deserved this chance, every bit of it. And yet, as the door closed behind her, I felt the familiar sting of longing and regret. The world I had dreamed of, the studies I had planned, the life I had imagined, it had all been deferred, traded for duty, for love, for survival. I tried not to dwell on it. I told myself I had made my choice, that I had done the right thing. But some nights, when the house was quiet and Beatrice slept peacefully in her chair, I found myself pacing the floors, replaying what might have been. Chloe had the freedom to explore, to take chances, to chase her dreams, and I had stayed. I had given everything to a life that wasn't fully mine, sacrificing my youth, my ambition, my chance to be the doctor I had always wanted to become. It wasn't resentment, not entirely. It was more a complicated mixture of pride, longing, and a quiet ache that settled in my chest like a stone. I loved Chloe. I always had. But watching her go, seeing her life unfold while mine remained tethered to obligations I had not chosen, made me feel trapped in a world I had built for others, not for myself. And yet, even with the bitterness that sometimes rose unbidden, I understood the price of family. I had chosen it. I had stayed when it mattered most. But that choice left its mark, one I would carry quietly, like a shadow following me through the years. Every time Chloe called from university, excited about her courses, her friends, her independence, I smiled, cheering her on, while the shadow whispered reminders of all that I had postponed, all that I had given away. It was a strange life, measured in sacrifices and small victories, and I held it with both pride and a quiet aching regret. The world outside called for ambition and achievement, but my place was here, in a house filled with memories, devotion, and the subtle, unspoken tension of love measured unevenly. And in that tension, I began to sense the first hints of the storms yet to come. Storms that would challenge not only my sense of duty, but the very definition of family itself. 5 years had passed, but the weight of those years felt heavier than their number suggested. Chloe had grown into a young woman almost overnight, 19 now, confident, vibrant, and ready to step into the world. I was 23, still trying to find my footing in a life I hadn't fully chosen, bound to responsibilities that left little room for my own dreams. Chloe's excitement was contagious, though I tried not to let it show. She was preparing to leave for university, a new chapter filled with possibilities and freedom, things I had once dreamed of for myself. And in a way, I had. I had imagined being free, studying medicine, learning to heal and help others, chasing the life I had worked so hard to imagine. But those plans had been put aside, traded for the care of our grandmother and the safety of Chloe. Grandma Beatrice, now 88, was frail but still sharp in mind. She needed me every day, reminders, medications, meals, company, and I stayed, quietly carrying out the life I had inherited by circumstance. I'd accepted it willingly at 18, believing it was my duty. But now, standing at the threshold of what I had envisioned for my own life, the cost of that duty weighed on me like a stone. Chloe's departure was both joyful and painful. I helped pack her bags, held her as she hugged Beatrice, and watched her climb into a cab that would take her to a new world. I smiled as she waved goodbye, cheering her on, yet inside, a quiet ache gnawed at me. She was free to live the life I had dreamed of, to explore, to grow, to make mistakes and triumphs of her own. And I remained behind, tethered to the house and the family I had vowed to protect. Sometimes, in the still hours of the evening, I caught myself imagining how different things could have been, how it would have felt to study medicine, to walk through the halls of a university, to make choices for myself without the invisible weight of responsibility pressing down. The thought made me restless, sometimes bitter, even though I never let it touch Chloe. She hadn't asked for this life, hadn't chosen it. And despite the envy I sometimes felt, I loved her fiercely, and I knew she deserved every chance she had. But even love carries its quiet shadows. Watching her leave, seeing the world open before her while mine remained firmly closed, I felt a twinge of jealousy I couldn't fully deny. 5 years of sacrifice, of postponed dreams, of youth spent in service of others. And yet, I knew I wouldn't change a thing. I had done what I believed was right. I had stayed when it mattered most. But the ache of what I had given up lingered, a whisper in the background of every proud smile, every cheerful goodbye. And as I closed the door behind Chloe, the first faint stirrings of the storm ahead began to take shape. The kind of storm that tests love, loyalty, and the fragile bonds of family. A storm that would eventually shake everything I thought I knew about my sister, about myself, and about the name I had carried all my life. The day Grandma Beatrice passed away was silent in a way that made the world feel heavier than usual. The house, once full of her steady presence, her sharp eyes, her soft voice reminding us of who we were and where we came from, felt hollow. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your chest and made it hard to breathe, the kind that reminded you of the fragility of life. Chloe and I sat side by side on the old sofa, holding each other's hands as tears ran freely. We were 25 and 21, suddenly left with nothing but memories and a grief so deep it seemed impossible to bear. Beatrice had been our anchor. Even in her frailty, she had provided structure, love, and guidance. And now she was gone. The house smelled faintly of roses and lavender, her favorite perfume, but it was empty, stripped of the warmth she had infused into every corner. Chloe's small sobs reminded me of the girl she had been, fragile and wide-eyed, clinging to a world that had already taken too much from her. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be fine, even though I didn't know if it would be. My own grief was a roaring undercurrent I couldn't escape. A week later, we found ourselves in a lawyer's office. The kind of sterile room that smells faintly of leather and old paper. The kind of room where lives change in a single signature. The lawyer, a careful man with a sympathetic gaze, shuffled some papers in front of us and then looked up. His words came slowly, almost cautiously, as if trying to soften the blow. "Beatrice Langford left her entire estate to Chloe," he said. I stared at the document, my hands tightening into fists on my lap. The words seemed to blur together, to lose all meaning. Everything to Chloe. The house, the savings, the few personal belongings that had meant more than money, all of it gone to her. Not split, not shared, just gone. Chloe shifted in her seat, embarrassed, her fingers twisting together nervously. I have student loans," she said softly, almost apologetically. "I need this money to cover them. I can't. I don't know what to do." I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't the money itself that hurt. It was the realization that everything I had sacrificed for the past 5 years, everything I had given up to care for Chloe and Beatrice, was measured in ways I hadn't understood. She didn't offer to split anything, not even a small part. And though I tried to tell myself it was because of her debts, a part of me burned with betrayal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake Chloe and demand she see what her grandmother had cost me, what I had given up for her. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, quiet, feeling the weight of loss compounded by this sudden, unexpected separation. Chloe kept her head down, trying to calm me, to soothe the hurt she didn't fully understand she had caused. She was nervous, ashamed, but also determined. I could see it in her eyes. She needed this money, and nothing I could say would change that. I left the office feeling hollow, the sound of the lawyer's pen scratching across paper echoing in my head. I had given years of my life, my youth, my dreams, for a family that now measured my sacrifice in silence. Chloe tried to stay close, to comfort me, but her own worries kept her distant. And in that quiet distance, I felt the first pangs of something I hadn't anticipated. A fracture between us, subtle at first, but sharp enough to sting. Beatrice was gone, and with her, the last link to a family that had once seemed unbreakable. The home we had known, the routines we had clung to, and the trust I had held for so long, all seemed to dissolve in that lawyer's office. Chloe had the inheritance. I had the grief, the memory, and the silent knowledge that my sacrifice, my devotion, had gone unnoticed. And in that moment, I realized that love, even the love between sisters, could be as complicated and painful as grief itself. I didn't understand how to breathe after that day. The grief from losing Beatrice had barely settled when it was replaced by a different, sharper ache, one born of betrayal and disbelief. I had given everything to that house, to that family, to Chloe, and now I felt as though I had been erased. 5 years of my youth, 5 years of giving up my dreams to care for a grandmother and a sister who I had thought would never leave me behind, had been measured in a single cold legal document. Chloe had the inheritance. I had nothing. The house felt suffocating now. Every corner, every room, every faint scent of Beatrice's perfume that lingered on the curtains reminded me of what I had lost. Not just money or property, but recognition, love, and the life I thought I had built alongside my family. I wandered from room to room, unable to rest, my mind replaying every day I had spent cleaning, cooking, comforting, and sacrificing. I had been devoted, I had been loyal, I had been invisible, and no one had noticed. Not Chloe, not Grandma Beatrice, not anyone. Depression settled on me like a heavy fog. Simple tasks became monumental. I skipped meals, slept fitfully, and found no joy in the routines I had once managed with pride. The world outside moved forward, but I was trapped in a cycle of disbelief and self-reproach. How could life be so cruel? How could someone I had loved and protected, someone I had given everything for, turn out to be so indifferent? I tried talking to Chloe, searching for some hint of understanding, some gesture that could ease the sharp edge of my pain. But every conversation was tense, awkward. She seemed apologetic, yes, but hesitant, embarrassed, and distant. She had her own worries, student loans, responsibilities, the need to secure her future. And in her eyes, my suffering became something secondary, inconvenient, a reminder she wished she could soften but couldn't. Eventually, my frustration boiled over. I found myself standing in the living room, voice trembling, hands gripping the edge of the table, and I begged. "Please, Chloe," I said, my voice breaking. "Just let me stay here for a year, until I can afford rent. I don't want to be out on the street. I need some time to rebuild my life." Chloe's face went pale. She shifted uncomfortably, biting her lip. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She hated saying no. She hated hurting me. But the truth was unavoidable. "Jane, I can't," she whispered. "I have to sell the house quickly. I need to cover my loans. I wish things were different." The word "can't" struck me like a hammer. My chest tightened and a wave of panic and despair surged through me. I had sacrificed everything to care for them, and now even the small comfort of staying in the only home I had ever known was being taken away. But Chloe, despite her nervousness, managed a small gesture, one that was both awkward and sincere. I can give you 10% of what I get from selling the house," she said softly, avoiding my eyes. "It's something, at least, to help you start over." It wasn't what I had hoped for. It wasn't enough to erase the years I had given, the dreams I had set aside, or the pain of feeling invisible in my own life. But it was something, and in that moment, between frustration, grief, and the faintest spark of relief, I realized that the struggle ahead would have to be faced alone. That even when you love someone, even when you sacrifice for them, life doesn't always offer fairness. That night, I packed what I could, feeling the strange mixture of despair and resolve. I would leave the house, find a modest room, work long hours, and rebuild the fragments of the life I had once dreamed about. Chloe's token of support, awkward and insufficient as it was, became my tether to hope. But the sting of betrayal lingered, sharp and cold, and I knew that moving out was only the beginning, the first step in reclaiming myself from the years I had lost. I had barely started packing when I noticed it, a small, almost imperceptible panel behind the bookshelf in the corner of the living room. It had probably gone unnoticed for years, tucked away as if it were hiding from the world. Something compelled me to move the shelf, and behind it, I found a dusty wooden box. The kind of box that smelled faintly of mothballs and thyme, the kind that seemed to hum with secrets. Curiosity and apprehension warred inside me. I hesitated, running my fingers over the rough edges, then lifted the lid. Inside were papers, yellowed, brittle, with handwriting and official stamps that made my heart thump. I pulled them out slowly, one by one, and sat on the floor, surrounded by the quiet hum of the house I had spent so many years caring for. The first few pages were mundane. Bills, medical forms, old receipts. But then, my eyes caught something different. Adoption papers, legal documents I had never been told about. I stared at the words, unable to comprehend them at first. My parents had adopted me? Me? Jane Langford? My mind spun. I felt a cold, hollow ache rise in my chest. I read on, every line unraveling the life I thought I knew. My parents had wanted a child desperately, but for years it hadn't been possible. They had turned to adoption, and I had been their choice, brought into the family not through biology but through hope, longing, and necessity. And then, 4 years later, Chloe was born. Their biological child, their miracle. My hair, my features, my very being had nothing to do with the Swedish great-grandmother I had always been told about. All the stories, all the pride in my blonde hair suddenly felt like a fragile, comforting fiction. I sank back against the wall, the papers trembling in my hands. The room seemed to tilt. The years I had spent sacrificing, giving, caring, and loving, all of it, reframed in a way I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't a Langford by blood, not in the way I had believed. I had been their daughter in every way that mattered, yes, but the truth carried a sharp edge I wasn't prepared for. The love I had given, the life I had postponed, suddenly felt measured against something I couldn't change, something I hadn't been meant to know until now. Tears blurred my vision as I thought about Chloe, the sister I had protected, sacrificed for, and loved unconditionally. She had always been the biological daughter, the child they had longed for after me. And yet, she had never known the weight I carried for her, the years I had given up quietly, without complaint. I realize now why, unconsciously, I had always sought her approval, always tried to be better, always pushed myself to earn love that I thought came more easily to her. My blonde hair, my identity, my childhood pride, all of it had been a kind of story I told myself, a way to belong to a family that had loved me deeply but differently. The truth was bitter, sharp, and yet oddly liberating. For the first time in my life, I understood why I had felt both so connected and so invisible, why the shadow of Chloe's effortless favor had always hovered over me. I hugged the box to my chest, trembling, letting the sobs come. The world had shifted again, in ways I hadn't imagined. But in the midst of the pain and shock, a tiny seed of clarity began to grow. I was still Jane. I had still given my life to love and care. And though my bloodline wasn't what I thought, my heart, my choices, and my sacrifices were undeniably mine. For the first time, I realized that truth, no matter how painful, could be the beginning of understanding myself, and perhaps, in time, the first step toward forgiving, and maybe even reconnecting with Chloe. The knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. Chloe, my sister, my biological sister, the girl I had cared for and loved, now stood on the threshold. She looked different, older, more composed, yet nervous, as if she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind. Her eyes searched mine, hesitant, conflicted. Jane, she began, her voice trembling. I've been thinking about everything, about the house, the inheritance, about you. I was wrong. I know 10% isn't nearly enough. You gave everything for me and Grandma. You stayed behind when I got the life I dreamed of. I want to fix it. I'll give you 50% of what I get from selling the house. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My heart thudded so hard I thought she might hear it. 50%. Half of everything. The words felt unreal, like sunlight piercing through the clouds after a storm that had lasted years. I wanted to cry, to laugh, to scream all at once. Slowly, I stepped forward, my hands trembling, and took hers. Chloe, thank you, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Thank you for seeing me, for acknowledging everything I've done. This means more than you'll ever know. She hesitated, shifting from foot to foot, unsure how to meet my eyes. There was a vulnerability there I hadn't seen before, a quiet shame, a nervous hope that maybe I would accept her offer, forgive her for what had felt like betrayal. And I did forgive her, in that moment, at least partially, because she had come to me with honesty, offering what she could. I reached into the box I had found weeks earlier and pulled out the documents I had buried deep in my drawer. Adoption papers, legal forms, evidence of a truth I had only just begun to understand fully. My hands shook as I handed them to her. Chloe, there's something you need to see, I said softly. I found these hidden. They're about me, about our family, about who I really am. Her eyes flicked over the papers, scanning quickly at first, then slowing as comprehension hit. Her face changed in ways I hadn't anticipated. The nervous shame and tentative hope melted, replaced by a cold, stunned silence. She froze, her lips parting slightly, her hands dropping to her sides. The warmth, the softness I had felt moments ago, vanished, leaving a sharp, impenetrable edge in its place. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The room felt smaller, charged with a tension I had never experienced before. Chloe's eyes, once so familiar, now seemed distant, unreadable, almost alien. I watched her struggle, the color draining from her cheeks, the small tremor in her jaw, the disbelief and confusion flickering behind her eyes. Finally, she whispered, almost to herself, I didn't know. I let the silence hang, giving her the space to process, even as my own heart raced. I didn't blame her. I didn't scream. I simply watched, holding on to the fragile thread of hope that, even after this revelation, even after the years of hurt and misunderstanding, there was still a chance to rebuild some part of our connection. But in that moment, I realized that knowing the truth, the secret of my adoption, the life I hadn't known, had changed everything. And while Chloe had offered me half of the inheritance, the balance of power, understanding, and trust between us had shifted in ways I wasn't sure we could ever fully restore. The morning after Chloe's visit, I carried the last of my belongings into the small rented room I had found, a modest space with peeling wallpaper and a single narrow window that let in a pale strip of sunlight. It was nothing like the home I had known all my life, nothing like the house I had poured myself into for the past 5 years. But it was mine, in the sense that it offered a place to start again, to rebuild, to survive. I unpacked slowly, each item a reminder of what had been and what I had lost. The hospital scrubs, neatly folded, represented hours of exhaustion, of work that kept me afloat. The few personal mementos, photographs of Chloe and Beatrice, small souvenirs from our trips when life had felt lighter, reminded me of love, of family, of sacrifice. And in the quiet moments between organizing my things, I allowed myself to imagine the future. A tiny studio of my own in the city, a life independent from the shadows of the past, made possible by the 50% Chloe had promised. At first, Chloe called regularly. Short messages, brief check-ins, glimpses into her busy life at university, and the ongoing sale of the house. I clung to those messages, each one a lifeline, a reassurance that she still cared, still remembered her promise. But as weeks passed, the calls became less frequent, the replies shorter, tinged with the stress of her responsibilities. She was busy, she said, studying, managing paperwork, handling the estate. I told myself she was just overwhelmed, that soon she would have time to reach out properly. I threw myself into my work at the hospital, taking extra shifts, filling my hours with tasks and routines that left little room for self-pity. I cleaned rooms, transported patients, delivered medications, and stayed late to cover for colleagues. Exhaustion became familiar, almost comforting, a distraction from the emptiness of the rented room. And through it all, I held on to hope. Hope that Chloe would honor her word, that one day the promise of the inheritance would allow me to step out from this temporary space into something permanent, something of my own. Months slipped by. The world outside moved at a steady pace, indifferent to my struggles, and I kept to my routines. Then, one evening, a glance at a real estate website stopped me cold. The house, our family home, the place that had held years of love, grief, and sacrifice, was listed as sold. My heart sank. Chloe hadn't called. She hadn't mentioned it. I stared at the screen, the numbers and the familiar photos blurring before my eyes. Panic and doubt began to creep in, but I pushed them away. She must be busy, I told myself. She's handling everything, stressed and focused. She hasn't forgotten me. She will send the money soon. Even as a knot of unease twisted in my stomach, I held on to the fragile thread of trust I had placed in her. I had given years of my life to her, sacrificed my own dreams, and now, despite the growing distance, I believed she would keep her word. The bond of sisterhood, biological or not, had carried me this far, and I clung to it still, even as the first shadows of doubt began to stretch between us. I went to bed that night with a restless mind, imagining the tiny studio I would buy, the life I would build, all dependent on a promise I hoped would not break. Outside, the city lights shimmered faintly through the window, indifferent to my hopes, my dreams, and my trust. And I realized that the real test of family, of loyalty, and of resilience was only beginning. Weeks had passed since I first noticed the sold sign on the family home. Weeks in which I had stared at my phone more times than I could count, each glance filling me with a mixture of hope and dread. Every missed call, every unanswered message, every short "I'll call you later" from Chloe tightened the knot of anxiety in my chest. I tried to tell myself she was busy, that the weight of her studies and responsibilities had swallowed her whole. But with every passing day, that excuse grew thinner, more fragile, and the gnawing suspicion at the back of my mind became impossible to ignore. Eventually, the waiting became unbearable. I couldn't stay locked in my rented room, clinging to promises that might never be fulfilled. Something had to be done. I needed answers, closure, and maybe, in some small, stubborn hope, reconciliation. I caught a bus to the university campus, the city blurring past my window as my thoughts spun in a whirlwind of fear, hope, and heartbreak. What would I say when I saw her? Would she even meet me? Would I finally discover that the bond I thought we shared had been broken beyond repair? When I found Chloe, she was sitting under a tree near the library, her books stacked beside her, earbuds in, lost in her own world. For a moment I hesitated, watching her. She looked so familiar and yet so distant, a stranger wearing the face of my sister. Then, gathering every ounce of courage I had left, I called her name softly. Her reaction was immediate. She yanked out her earbuds, eyes wide with shock and anger. "Jane, what are you doing here?" Her voice trembled, sharp and loud enough to draw the attention of students walking by. "Don't push me. Don't come here and try to make me feel guilty." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my own emotions in check. The words I had rehearsed, the questions I had practiced over and over, felt suddenly small in the face of her fury. But I had to know. I had to understand. I stepped closer, voice quiet, almost fragile. "Chloe, did you change your mind because I was adopted?" Her face froze. The anger didn't leave, but it was joined by something else. Disbelief, confusion, a flicker of guilt, perhaps. She looked away, twisting her hands together, unable to meet my eyes. I'm sorry," she said finally, voice soft but firm. I need to build my own life. I can't be responsible for your past or your pain or anything. I have to move forward, alone." I felt a chill crawl down my spine, as if the air between us had hardened into something unbreachable. My chest tightened, the lump in my throat refusing to swallow down tears I hadn't yet allowed myself to shed. I wanted to argue, to cry, to beg, but the words stuck in my throat. I could only nod slightly, a silent acknowledgement that the sister I had trusted, the girl I had raised and loved, had drawn a line I could not cross. Chloe turned and walked away, her books clutched tightly to her chest, her steps brisk and determined. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching her disappear into the crowd of students, the distance between us no longer just physical. The bridge of understanding and trust we had once shared now seemed fractured, perhaps irreparably. And in that quiet, sunlit corner of the campus, I realized that love alone might not be enough to hold a family together when the weight of secrets, obligations, and self-preservation became too heavy to bear. After that day on campus, Chloe and I stopped talking. The silence was immediate, sharp, and almost unbearable at first, but over time it became a rhythm, a background to the slow unfolding of my life. I tried to push the hurt aside, to focus on the life I still had the power to shape, the life I could rebuild from the ashes of disappointment and betrayal. 2 years passed in a blur of work, study, and small victories. I poured myself into my shifts at the hospital, long hours moving through hallways filled with the smell of antiseptic and the soft murmurs of patients. The work was exhausting, but it grounded me. It reminded me that my efforts had purpose, that I could still help others, even if my own family had failed to honor the sacrifices I had made for them. In the quiet moments between shifts, I began to dream again, carefully, cautiously. I applied to nursing school, determined to finally step into the world I had once imagined for myself. It wasn't exactly what I had wanted when I was 18 and full of ambition, dreaming of becoming a doctor. but it was a life in healthcare nonetheless, a path that allowed me to care for people, to heal, to give, and in doing so, to find meaning in the work I had been doing all along. And then there was Michael, a kind, patient doctor I met at the hospital. He had a quiet sense of humor, the kind that made long, exhausting days feel lighter. He noticed the care I gave to patients, the way I stayed late to ensure no detail was missed, and he admired it. Our friendship grew slowly, naturally, and eventually something deeper blossomed, a love built not on grand gestures but on shared respect, understanding, and the quiet moments of life lived together. By the time we married, I had found a rhythm I hadn't thought possible. We bought a small house in the countryside, far enough from the city to find peace, but close enough to remain connected to work and school. It was modest, simple, and entirely ours. The garden needed work, the rooms were small, and the paint was faded, but every corner was a reminder that I had built something of my own, on my terms, free from the weight of obligation that had once tied me to the Langford family home. Nursing school became my focus, a new challenge, a chance to reclaim some of the ambition I had shelved years ago. I learned, practiced, stumbled, and improved, slowly building skills that made me proud and gave me confidence I hadn't known I could have. The work at the hospital continued, but now it was paired with study, growth, and the comforting knowledge that my future was mine to shape. In the quiet evenings, Michael and I would sit on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills, sharing simple dinners and laughter that felt almost foreign compared to the tension and sorrow that had filled my earlier years. I had learned to live without Chloe in my day-to-day life, and while a part of me still ached for the bond we had lost, I also felt a quiet pride in what I had built. A home, a career, and a love that was steady and true. For the first time in years, I felt the heavy weight of the past begin to lift. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, messy, beautiful, and alive. And as I prepared for the next chapter, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps even in the absence of reconciliation, happiness could still find me. It was a quiet Sunday morning. Sunlight spilled across the wooden floors of our small countryside house, and the air smelled faintly of brewing coffee and fresh linen. I was just finishing breakfast when my phone rang. The name flashing on the screen made my heart skip. Chloe. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I wanted to answer, but something in her voice when I picked up would have made me unable to say no. "Jane, can I come over?" Her voice was trembling, fragile, almost unfamiliar. There was a weight in it, a rawness I hadn't heard since our parents died. My chest tightened, a mixture of worry, lingering hurt, and cautious hope. "Of course," I said softly. "Come whenever you're ready." When she arrived, the Chloe who stepped into the living room wasn't the confident, composed sister I had known. She looked smaller somehow, her face pale and drawn, her eyes hollow and searching. Her usual poise was gone, replaced with a vulnerability that made my heart ache. She had aged in the kind of way that only despair can age a person. Too fast, too heavy, leaving the warmth of youth behind. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands, and I sat beside her, unsure what to do or say. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until she finally lifted her head, tears streaking down her cheeks. I never paid my debts," she admitted, her voice breaking. I spent it all, Jane. The inheritance. I thought I could chase a good life, a life that would make everything easier, but I ruined it. I ruined everything. I don't know what to do." I didn't speak immediately. I simply reached for her trembling hands and held them in mine. The years of pain, resentment, distance, and misunderstanding all collided in that moment. And yet, despite it all, despite the anger I had felt and the hurt I had carried, a different feeling took hold. Love, deep and unshakable, the kind that doesn't vanish even when trust falters. "You're my sister," I said softly, voice steady despite the tears in my own eyes. "You always were. You always will be." She looked at me then, really looked, and in her eyes I saw the raw confession of someone who had finally admitted her mistakes, someone who had nowhere else to turn. I pulled her into a hug, letting her cry against me, feeling the weight of years of pain slowly begin to lift. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. I feel like I've failed at everything." "You haven't failed," I said firmly. "You lost your way, yes, but I'm here. We'll figure this out together. You don't have to face this alone." And so she stayed. The process wasn't easy. Chloe had to rebuild not just her finances, but herself, learning to be responsible, accountable, and honest in ways she never had before. I helped her through the paperwork, guided her as she set limits and created a plan, and most importantly, reminded her that she wasn't alone anymore. She learned slowly, stumbled occasionally, but each step forward was a triumph, and each step strengthened the bond between us. Now, Chloe lives with me. Our small house has become both a sanctuary and a place of healing. Every day I see her grow stronger, more grounded, more herself. And every day I am reminded that family isn't just about blood or inheritance. It's about love, forgiveness, and the willingness to stand together even when the past is heavy. We're not perfect. Life still challenges us. But we face it together, sisters in every meaningful sense of the word, and for the first time in years, I feel the kind of peace that comes from knowing that love, patience, and resilience can truly heal even the deepest wounds. I gave my youth to a family that wasn't entirely mine, sacrificing my dreams to care for a grandmother and a sister I loved more than anything. I stayed behind while life moved forward for Chloe, watching her grow, leaving me trapped in duty and longing. And when our last family member passed, I discovered she inherited everything, while I was left with nothing. For years, I struggled with jealousy, heartbreak, and the weight of my own sacrifices. I confronted Chloe, begged for help, and even when she promised me a fraction of what was rightfully mine, the distance between us grew. I rebuilt my life slowly, finding love, stability, and purpose, only for the past to return when Chloe came to me, broken, having wasted the inheritance she once held. I helped her. I guided her. I reminded her that family isn't just about blood or money. It's about love, forgiveness, and standing together when life falls apart. But now I ask you, what would you do if your family betrayed you, if your sacrifices were overlooked, or if the person you loved most hurt you deeply? Would you forgive, like I did? Or would you walk away forever,